Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. The Odin 2 Mini from AYN just arrived in the mail earlier today, so we're going to do an impressions video today. However, this one's going to be a little bit more complicated than normal. For starters, my family and I are leaving tomorrow on travel, and so I don't have a ton of time to basically go through and do my full in-depth review stuff that I usually will do. However, I'm going to take this with me on travel, and so when I get back, I think I'm going to have a really mature understanding of how this device is going to be, especially when you're taking it out and about. So I actually think it's going to be a good thing. It just means that this video in particular is going to be a little bit more raw, off the cuff, because I'm only limiting myself to about 2 hours with the device before I cut it off and then start doing editing and whatnot. Now, to further complicate things, this guy just arrived in the mail a few hours ago. This is the RG Cube from Ambernick. So I have two devices that I got to do impressions on before I go on travel, and so I don't think I'm sleeping tonight. We're just going to kind of work through each of these, and I think this week is going to be a really fun week in terms of the impressions, just because you'll get the Odin 2 Mini, and then a couple days later I'll release the RG Cube. And that's going to be about it for this week in particular. I've got a couple other videos coming out while we're gone, but by the time I get back, yeah, I'll do full reviews of each of these. But for now, let's just dive in and do the impressions of the Odin 2 Mini first. Now, the Odin 2 Mini is basically, as the name implies, a smaller version of the AYN Odin 2, which is a device that came out about 7 months ago at this point. I love it. That is one of my favorite devices altogether, the Odin 2. I use it all the time. Every time I go on travel, that's the one I bring. In fact, this is it right here. And so I made lots of videos about it, so no surprises there. This is Android-based. It uses the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip, which is excellent for basically everything that you can emulate on Android. This thing can handle. It's also great with Android games. I don't play a ton of those, but I know there's a lot of people who really love using this for Call of Duty, Warzone, things like that. So this is a smaller version, and obviously it's modeled after a PS Vita kind of design. We will compare it against the PS Vita and other devices here in a minute. Now, the box itself, this is a fake unboxing because I already took this thing apart I don't know, 3 hours ago, and I did a bunch of setup already because I didn't want to waste your time when we do the impressions. So Android takes a while to kind of get up and running. So I did most of that stuff already, at least to the point where I can show off gameplay and whatnot as well. But in this video, we're going to mostly focus on the hardware, how it feels, things like that. Anyway, let's do that fake unboxing. So this is the black model is what I got in the mail. It comes with a USB-C cable, kind of similar to the other ones that I've seen before from them, so no surprises there. Now, the device itself is an engineering sample, so this is not ready for prime time just yet. So the plastics are a little bit different on this one. And then additionally, they said the shoulders and triggers have been tweaked a little bit for the final result as well. So this one is the black model, and it is pretty smudgy. I never had the black model of the Odin 2, so I'm not sure how smudgy it is compared to others. But here you can see after just a couple hours of messing around with it, it's already picking up smudges. But this is not the final plastic. So the original plastic is probably going to be a little bit different. If somebody is an Odin 2 owner that has the black model, can you leave a comment down below? Let us all know how it is in terms of smudging with the black model, because I'm not really sure with the Odin 2. Anyway, yeah, the plastic itself, we're not going to really grade it right here. We're mostly going to focus on everything else. So let's take a look at the overall design. And I think right off the bat, yeah, totally looks like a PS Vita. That's my first impression. It's a little bit thicker, not by much, but it is definitely thicker. Let's actually compare the two right now. So here is my PS Vita, and when you're looking at it top down like this, you're thinking, wow, that's actually very similar. But when I'm looking at it my own angle right here, I can definitely see that one is a lot thicker than the other. So let's do a quick measurement between the two. Okay, so we're looking at about 19.5 millimeters at the thinnest point with the Odin 2 Mini, and about 15 millimeters exactly with the PS Vita. So there is quite a big difference in thickness between the two. Yes, I can totally get it where if you're looking at them, yeah, they're kind of very similar in size. But when you're looking at pocketability and thickness, there is a difference here. And I did try pocketing this. I've got some footage I'm going to play right now. It fits in the pocket. The thumbsticks and as well as the triggers definitely stand out. They stick out from your pocket a little bit. And then also, just in general, the analog sticks get caught in my pocket as well. But I would definitely say that this device is more pocketable than the Odin 2 was. In fact, let's do a quick comparison in thickness between those two. So I'm going to grab that one. And yeah, you can see just a big old difference between these two. This one really does get its name in terms of Odin Mini. We'll do more side comparisons here in a moment, but I just wanted first impression that yeah, this thing actually earns its name. It is a mini version of the Odin 2. Okay, now second impressions is just the overall control scheme looks pretty neat. Like we have the same like PS Vita style D-pad right here, same kind of glass edge to it, or crystal or whatever they like to call it. And it's got that same feel, like that same PS Vita D-pad feel. We've seen this for a long time. The original Odin had something similar to it. The Odin 2 obviously had it. And then like the Retroid devices as well, like the Retroid Pocket, basically from the 3 and beyond have had something very similar to this. This one has got a glassy texture to it, so that's new. But otherwise, very similar in feel. Got that nice kind of clicky feel to it. So I think this is going to be great. Next up, we have the analog stick, and this is very, very similar. It's probably the same as the other one. So same kind of smooth feeling. It is small, but man, you get a good wide range of motion here. So very similar to the Odin 2, as well as like the Retroid Pocket 2S and the Retroid Pocket 4 and 4 Pro. So all of that's going to be really good. These are some of the best small analog sticks that you can find on the market right now, and I love that they have them here. So much better than like a PS Vita analog stick. I know it looks kind of similar, but it is completely different. I wish that every small handheld used sticks like this. Now below that, we've got two Android functions. So we have our home button as well as our back button. Each of these have little labels to them. The buttons themselves are kind of like a gray texture or color compared to the black of the shell itself. We've also got two speakers right here that are front facing. And when you're holding it, you don't really cover the speakers. You do a little bit on the edges, but not much. If anything, you're just kind of funneling the sound directly into your ears. And so I don't mind the positioning of these speakers. I was a little bit worried about them. I thought that maybe your hands would cover them, but I think this is absolutely acceptable, at least for me. And of course, once we turn it on, we'll do some audio testing. Let's go over to the right side next. So we have our face buttons. These are completely different than before. These are glossy, which are the first glossy buttons that I've seen from AYN. They again have a little bit of labeling on them, and they have the Xbox pattern here. So A is on the bottom here as opposed to on the right, like with all of their other devices. So they've made that change. I think it's a good thing because by default, Android is going to expect that A button's on the bottom. And so I think this is actually a good move right here. Same analog stick on this side, and then we've got our select and start buttons, same speaker. Now the feel of the face buttons is a little bit unique. So it's got a rubber membrane connection. So definitely a little bit bouncier and mushier than like the original PS Vita, which had that same clickiness as the D-pad. Instead, this is like a combination where you have clickiness on the left and then face button with a little bit of membrane here on the right. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it actually feels pretty good. Like I've tested around with some games and stuff. It's got a weird mixture of like retro and modern, but I think it works. And so no complaints from me in terms of the face buttons. They don't like bottom out or any of that kind of stuff. I think that AYN has really learned how to make buttons over the years, and it shows right here because I think this, from a just controls perspective, I think this is very good. Okay, let's move up to the top now. So we have our shoulder and trigger buttons first. Like I mentioned, you know, the company themselves said that they have tweaked these. And so I'm not going to grade these too hard just yet, just because this isn't a retail unit. But I will say that just overall, I think they are pretty good already. So the shoulder button has got a little bit of clickiness to it. It's a little bit loud, but not too bad. It's just got a little micro switchy kind of feel to it. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. It reminds me a bit of like a Nintendo Switch, like a Switch Lite. So no big problem right there, but a little bit on the loud side. Still responsive and easy to press down on. Now the triggers are analog and they actually feel pretty good. Not a lot of range of motion right here. You can see that it just kind of goes down. But in the settings, like we'll test that as well, it feels pretty good. Like I've got the 0 to 100%. It's not going to be like super finite if you're like doing a driving game or whatever, but it is good enough for like a small handheld that you have on the go. So overall, I like the feel of these. They are swooped, as you can see right here, like they kind of swoop out. And so it does give you a little bit of a finger rest. So as you're holding it, I think it's actually pretty good. Like you can rest your fingers here and then pull down when you need to. Now in terms of ergonomics, when I'm holding onto the controller and then I pull on these triggers, I can feel a little bit of pressure down here on the bottom corners. This is kind of similar to other smaller devices where it's just not like totally balanced. And so you feel a little bit of that, okay, this is a compromised kind of form factor. It's super like comfortable to kind of grip your hand around, but you also can feel it moving a little bit as you pull on those triggers. Not a perfect experience, but it's still like good. Like I'm not saying this is like a super negative thing, but it's an observation that I've noticed. Once I have tested this for a while and do my full review, then I can tell you like, okay, I liked that or I didn't like it. For now, it's just something that I noticed as I was testing it. Not a huge deal, at least for me, but something to think about, especially if you got bigger hands, this might feel a little bit small in the hands. It's a mini device after all. Now, also up top, we have an SD card slot, little flap right here. You can pull that off, put it back on. We have a HDMI output. This is micro HDMI, as you can see right here. Now this thing is also capable of video out via USB-C, so you can have both. So for example, if you want to charge it while also having video out, you can do that. You can also just dock this thing into something that has HDMI output. You've got a lot of options here. It's Android 13. It's got a more modern Snapdragon chipset. Like, you've got a lot of reasons why this is just gonna work for most things. Further along, we have our volume up and down buttons, then an LED indicator. This will turn on when it's like charging, for example. And then also you have your power button. Now let's look at the bottom. So we have our USB-C port capable of video out as well as charging. And then we have our headphone jack, always great to see in one of these handhelds. Now in the back, we got a few things going on. We've got our engraved AYN logo, and then we have our fan intake. And then up top, we can see this is where the fan is actually going out, pushing the hot air out. Also on the back, we have these two little dimples. Again, very similar to a PS Vita. They have these same things. This is not like a touchpad or anything like it was with the PS Vita, but it is definitely taking that design. I can't believe they got away with this thing because this is so close to like a Sony trademark, way more than any others that I've seen. For example, like the GPD Win 4, which looked like a PS Vita. This thing is like a PS Vita. It's very similar. So I guess it flew under Sony's radar. I'm not really sure. Okay, now let's talk about ergonomics. I already talked about these shoulders and triggers and kind of how you would rest your index fingers here, but the other part is that your middle fingers are going to be like a counterweight. Like, you need to have them a little bit closer like this, and that's going to be basically a counterbalance where you're going to hold them up here, and that's going to really grip the device itself. And then also your other two fingers here on the bottom, those are going to go like right here is the other counterbalance. So this is how you're going to hold the device. This is going to be propped up by your middle fingers, and then your bottom fingers are going to be down here as kind of the counterweight. Now, because it's so curved along the edges, it's not a big deal. It actually feels pretty good. You can kind of cup around with your index fingers, hold them here, middle fingers back here, and then the other ones down below. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world. Like, I don't want to say that this is going to be like better than a Steam Deck or the Odin 2, which have like actual grips to them. I think you're going to have to get used to this overall feel. However, in terms of just like smaller devices, it doesn't feel bad at all. It's going to be a compromise. Every small device is going to be a compromise in some way. And that's kind of where it is right there, where you don't have these big grips. You're going to rely on a counterbalance of your own fingers, which may get crampy over time. Again, this is just impressions. So we will see once I actually take this with me on travel and see how it is over about the 10 days that we're gone. Okay, let's do some size and weight comparisons. We'll start with the Odin 2. I think that makes the most logical sense. And you can already see that, yeah, there's a big difference here. It's almost like there's an inch difference between the two. It's also quite a bit thicker, and it's actually standing up on the table quite a bit more as well. Now, the thing that you have to keep in mind is that I don't mind the size of the Odin 2. It's pretty big, but I think it's like a little bit larger than the Nintendo Switch. Light at least, and then also it's a little bit more ergonomic. And so the other thing to keep in mind is the size difference between the screens as well. The Odin 2 is 6 inches, 1080p. This one is 5.5 inches, also 1080p. They're also different screens. We'll compare them more once I actually turn it on. But as you can see, yeah, big size difference between the two. Let's try a couple more. Now let's compare the PS Vita and the Odin 2 Mini. So you can see here that the size is pretty similar between the two, but the Vita is quite a bit smaller, both in terms of just like width, but then also in thickness. This is the PS Vita 2000, which means that it is thinner than the 1000 series, which unfortunately I don't have on me right now. But you can see that, yeah, pretty similar in size, but the Vita is smaller. So if you're looking for something that is the exact size, it's not going to be it. But it might be a little bit closer to the 1000, at least in terms of thickness. Okay, next up is my Nintendo Switch Lite. These are actually pretty similar in size, although this is thinner. And then also it's got a little bit less in terms of width as well. So not quite like the same, but similar. So if you like the size of a Switch Lite, maybe you want something a little bit smaller, then the Odin 2 Mini is going to be exactly that. Okay, next up is the original Odin Pro versus the Odin 2 Mini. You can see that this one is quite a bit bigger. Also had a 6-inch screen, much like with the Odin 2. And this one is about the same thickness between the two. So if you like the thickness of the Odin 2 altogether, it's going to be pretty similar with the Odin 2 Mini. Okay, next is the Anbernic RG Arc. So this one has a similar size screen. I think this is also 5.5 inches, but OLED. And then this one actually has like ergonomic grips and bumps to it. And so this one actually feels a lot more comfortable. But again, you have like something to hold on to. So it just feels really sturdy. And so, yeah, I think size-wise, this one's a little bit bigger, but that size is kind of justified just in the fact that this one is so comfortable to hold. Next up, we have a PSP. So I think this is a 2000 series. This is the God of War one. And so you can see that, yeah, quite a big difference here in terms of size. But again, like the PS Vita was a lot bigger than the PSP as well. So not a huge surprise for me. But yeah, this is a comparison between these two. Okay, next up is the Trim UI Smart Pro, also kind of PS Vita styled. And you can see that, yeah, they're actually pretty similar. This one is thinner and smaller, but it's closer to like a PS Vita in terms of size, maybe a little thicker than the 2000 series. But yeah, it's kind of amazing just how small the Odin 2 Mini is when you compare it to something like this one. Okay, next up we have the AYN Pocket S. Now this one actually is pretty similar in terms of chipset, but has a larger screen. It's actually bezel. It's kind of amazing. This thing is an engineering marvel, like just how thin it is and how sleek it feels and whatnot. But I would say the controls on this are a lot worse than the Odin 2 Mini. The face buttons feel better on the Odin 2 Mini. These are just a little bit less responsive. And then the D-pad on this is kind of garbage. They say they're working on it, so we'll see how it goes with the retail units. But as it stands right now, this one's mushy and lacks pivot, whereas this one on the Odin 2 Mini is excellent. And so no problems here whatsoever with the D-pad compared to this one in particular. But at least in terms of size, you can see that, yeah, this is longer and thinner, so maybe a bit of a wash, but they are both pretty small and compact considering the fact that they are both very powerful Android devices. Next up, we have the Retroid Pocket 4. So this one is a kind of budget device. It's $150 to $200, whereas the Odin 2 Mini starts at like $340. So this one is quite a bit cheaper. And the thing about this one is this is like the best like smaller Android device that you can get that has a good amount of power for the price. This one is not that much smaller than the Odin 2 Mini. And so maybe that's the niche that AYN is thinking when they made the Odin 2 Mini, is that they'll make something that's on the smaller end for people who want something like the Retroid Pocket 4 and 4 Pro, but with more power and maybe like that PS Vita style as well. So I think maybe that's what they were going with between these two, because they are pretty similar in size, although the Odin 2 Mini is a little bit larger. Now at $340, you might be thinking, just get a Steam Deck, bro. And so here is a comparison between the two. And you can see that, yeah, size is a major difference between these. So if you're looking for something that's pocketable and smaller, and you don't mind paying like a high Steam Deck sort of price for it, and the limitations of like Android and, the fact that it can't emulate everything and it can't play PC games, then this is kind of where you make that decision point between these two. There's a lot of people who think the Steam Deck is too big and they just want to play like Switch games and PS2 and GameCube. Then the Odin 2 might be a valuable solution. For me personally, I don't think it's worth really comparing between the two because they are two completely different use cases, but this kind of helps to demonstrate why they are so different from one another. Okay, now we'll talk about weight. So this is 323 grams, which I think is pretty hefty. When you hold it, you know this is a solid device. It's got a fan inside. It's got a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, which is contributing to that weight. It's not a huge size of battery. The regular Odin had an 8,000 milliamp hour battery, so that was amazing. This one's a little bit less amazing in that regard. 5,000 is still pretty darn big for most of these handhelds around this size. Either way, it's got some heft to it, 323 grams. For a comparison, the Odin 2 is 419 grams, so almost 100 grams heavier. Again, this is not a device I would consider to be super heavy. It's got some heft to it, but it feels really nice in the hand as well. Another comparison would be the Retroid Pocket 4 or 4 Pro, and yeah, this one's quite a bit lighter, 268 grams. And then finally, we have the PS Vita. You can see this is almost 100 grams lighter, which in the case of about 220 grams, that means it's almost 50% heavier with the Odin 2 Mini. So yes, they are very similar looking, but in terms of just heft and thickness, they are totally different. Okay, so overall, with its physical properties in mind, I think that they did a pretty good job designing this handheld. Now, the implications of whether or not you even need this handheld in the first place, whether or not it's worth the exact price point, all that stuff needs to come in time. After I've tested it a bunch, can see exactly what it can do, when I've tested the battery life thoroughly, when I can test the screen, all those kind of components. For now, I can say, at least in terms of just feel and the buttons and just the design itself, I think that yes, they did a good job with this device. Whether or not that warrants $340 or more, that's really going to be up to some of those other factors that we'll figure out later on. And that's one of the reasons why I like making an impressions video before I make a full review. Sometimes I'll get some time with a device and maybe I've tested previous models and so I can make a review right out the gate after a few days. But other times, like with something like this, I think it takes a little bit more time. So as these devices start to get in people's hands, I get it. There's a lot of enthusiasm. People like to make snap judgments. But I don't know. I'm going to take my time and make sure that we're getting the right kind of judgment with this device. And it just so happens I'm taking it on travel with me, which is like a great opportunity. Either way, from a hardware perspective, I think just in terms of build quality and what they were doing with the design, I can see what they were doing here. And it does leave me pretty excited about the handheld in general. All context aside, the fact that whether or not you even need this thing in the first place compared to the Odin 2. Either way, let's move on to the actual software. So I'm going to turn this on and actually get an idea of how this is when we're actually playing it. Okay, let's start by talking about the software experience. So this is an Android-based device. So you're just going to have like an Android tablet kind of look to it. It's kind of like a phone with the controls slapped on it, just like any other Android-based device. So no surprises there. I did have like a setup process, and I did, like I mentioned, had some time to actually install stuff on it. So this isn't exactly what it'll look like when you turn it on for the first time, but it's going to be an Android tablet either way. Now next, let's talk a little bit about brightness. As you can see right here, it looks pretty good. It's kind of bright, but overall, I think you're probably going to enjoy the look of this screen. The big surprise is that this is only at like 30% brightness altogether. And so this can get very bright compared to the other. It totally washes out my camera, as you can see. Now, I did try playing this outdoors, but the thing is, this thing came so late in the day that it wasn't like direct sunlight. The sun had already kind of fallen back behind some clouds, and so I wasn't able to get direct sunlight comparison, but at least in a mostly bright environment here in Hawaii, you can see that, yeah, it is definitely bright outside. But by comparison, the Odin 2 is still plenty bright. Like I could play that outdoors as well. And the display is a mini LED. It's got 384 zones of brightness. I'm not really like super hip on mini LEDs, so I got to learn this stuff over the next couple weeks. But as it stands, this is pretty unique when it comes to handhelds with a mini LED screen. The only other one I can think of is going to be the Pimax Portal. The top end model of that had like a mini LED QLED model, and so that's the only other one I've seen for a dedicated handheld. Now, whether or not mini LED is going to provide a positive benefit to this device, it's still an unknown. After all, how often are you particularly going to be playing outdoors? And if so, then yeah, that might make sense. For me personally, I will sometimes like play it in a car, and I think that the Odin 2 got plenty bright for that anyway. And most of the time, I'm just going to play it indoors anyway, and also in the evening time when it's a little bit darker too. And so for me, I'm not going to be taking advantage of the mini LED brightness personally. Whether or not you will be is really going to be just a matter of like personal preference. Okay, now let's compare the screens of the Odin 2 Mini and the Odin 2. Now you can see here that they're kind of balanced right now. I've adjusted the screen brightness to make sure it looks pretty good here on camera. But here's the surprising thing. This one takes about 75% brightness on the Odin 2, whereas the Odin 2 Mini is getting the same kind of results, but at about 25% brightness. So that's one of the advantages here, that if you're going to be playing it like in a darker environment, you don't have to get it super bright in order to enjoy it. And so that might be something to think about. And so here they are at minimum brightness, and you can see there's a big difference between the two. And the Odin 2 has always been great in a dark environment. I like to play this thing at night. I'll like be in bed or whatever, just knock out a few minutes of like Sea of Stars or whatever. And so this has always been excellent for me. And unfortunately, I think the Odin 2 Mini is just a little bit brighter on that low end spectrum. So if you're looking to play it in the absolute dark, then that's not going to be as good. Another thing worth noting, and I didn't mention it before, the Odin 2 Mini does not have LED lights. So there's no lights around the sticks right here as they did with all of the other Odins. And then also there's no lights on the stripes on the sides here either. The Odin 2 has that, you know, it's got like the RGB lights here as well as these. So I got them really dim right now. But either way, yeah, that's one of the things I really like about the Odin 2 is the atmospherics that you get from that RGB lighting. And there are like apps that allow you to make like a rainbow effect and stuff. You're not gonna be able to do any of that stuff on the Odin 2 Mini. Now let's do full brightness. You can see that yes, the camera is getting washed out for both of them, but way more washed out with the Odin 2 Mini. So this one definitely gets a lot brighter. It's very hard to capture here on screen. I wouldn't want to play this device at the max brightness here. I could get away with doing this here in an indoor environment with the Odin 2, but with the Odin 2 Mini, it's just too bright. Like I don't need it to be this bright. Again, I think this is only going to be of value if you're playing it outside. And are you going to play your device outside? Most of the people who watch my reviews are kind of inside people. Either way, that's a quick screen comparison between the two. For my taste, the Odin 2 has always kind of matched what I needed in terms of brightness and dimness, and I think the Odin 2 Mini is just not a good fit for my own use case, mostly because I play it in darker environments. I play it at night after work, or I'll play it in bed before sleep. I don't necessarily go out into like the sunny Hawaii beach or whatever and actually play any device, and so this isn't a perfect fit for me, but it might be for you. Now, two characteristics of mini LED displays are called blooming and vignetting. So blooming is when basically light will spill into other parts of the screen, like in the darker parts, and gives it a bit of a halo effect. This is why you want to have a lot of dimming zones. I'm not sure if the amount of dimming zones on this device is really requisite in order to prevent that, but we'll do a little bit of testing. I don't have all the materials here that I could do like really good testing with, but at least I have a macro lens, so we can kind of zoom in a little bit and see whether or not we're having any sort of issues. Now, the other part is vignetting. So the idea here is that you get like darkness around the edges of the display. This is pretty common with mini LEDs. This can be kind of a cool effect when it comes to gaming, but here I'm showing Stardew Valley for that exact reason, because this is a pretty flat display altogether. And here you can see that yes, it's a little bit darker up top compared to the bottom, but you can see on the edges, it's pretty bright here on the Odin 2. Now on the mini LED, I can see a little bit of vignetting. Like on the edges, it's a little bit darker once you get into like the bezels and whatnot. So I'm seeing a little bit of that stuff. I don't mind that effect. You know, I used to be a food photographer. I used vignetting a lot when I was making my photos. So it just kind of guides your eye towards the center. If you're watching like a movie, this is something that you probably aren't going to want to see. And it's really going to be up to you whether or not this is a deal breaker for people who know a lot about mini LEDs. Okay, so here's my macro lens on the phone. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put it up against the text so we can get an idea of how everything looks. And I'll put this footage directly into the camera like during the editing process. But you can see right here, this is what it looks with the Odin 2 on an LCD panel. And on the other side, here is the mini LED. And honestly, I'm not really seeing a big difference. I don't think a macro lens is a very good tool for this particular test. So I'm gonna have to find more, I don't know, kind of different ways that I can test this. But I don't think the macro lens is really doing it justice here. Even if we go up to the corners and compare the vignetting here, yeah, it's really hard to see a difference between the two with the macro lens. So we're just going to have to try to find a different way to judge this. I thought that maybe the phone would work pretty well, but yeah, I don't think that's going to be a good indicator of those two properties. And so we're just going to have to do a lot of gaming on this and see how it actually feels. Okay, now let's do some audio testing. We're going to use the Horizon Chase song as typical for me. Now I'm going to start with the Odin 2, and then we'll do the Odin 2 Mini. We're going to do max volume. Okay, now we'll do Odin 2 Mini. Okay, I think it's pretty obvious just from the outset that this is not as good. Like it doesn't have the bass, like rich tones to it. And it makes sense. This thing has grip, so the audio is kind of like moving around within here, giving it that kind of rich feel. Whereas the Odin 2 Mini doesn't really have anywhere for the sound to travel. And so, yeah, I'm hearing the difference between the two. I definitely think the Odin 2 has much better audio between the two. It's still okay, it gets really loud, but it's pretty tinny and just not nice and bassy. Let's do a quick comparison again just so you have it one more time. So yeah, if you're looking for an immersive audio experience with this device, you're going to want to use the headphone jack or Bluetooth audio. Okay, now let's actually get into gaming and some of my other impressions. Before we do that though, I think throughout this video I had been saying 5.5 inches for the screen. It's only 5 inches. So it's a 1 inch difference between the Odin 2 and the Odin 2 Mini. And so it's also a 1/2 inch smaller than the Nintendo Switch Lite, which I had said was probably around the same size. So I just wanted to make sure I had been clear about that. I don't know why I was saying 5.5 inches, but I went and I checked right before I started this part, and yeah, 5 inches versus 6. So this is quite a bit smaller. I like 5-inch devices. Anything between like 5 and 6 is like perfect for me. 7 feels really big and roomy, but often you can't get a device that's going to be small with a 7-inch screen. So I personally like somewhere between 5 and 6. Anything below that is a little bit too small with more modern games, but I don't know, 5 is right at that cusp of being okay. Anyway, while I had the game open, let's do a little bit of testing with Horizon Chase. This feels good. I mean, the D-pad is nice and responsive as expected. The buttons feel nice and tight. It's overall just comfortable ergonomics, so no problems here whatsoever. I think it feels pretty nice. Okay, another thing I wanted to test is Call of Duty Warzone, and this was pretty easy to set up. All I had to really do was just like log in, get my like account details, and then go through the tutorial. After that, yeah, I was able to just kind of play the game. And so I'm not very good at this game, but one of the cool things is that I have like full controls, and so controller support, absolutely no problem. I'm assuming I'm not going to get like banned for using this or whatever. So I'm not going to like actually play the game that much, but I just wanted to mention that, yeah, it remembered everything about my account profile, even the fact that I'm like one of those dirty, like inverted players. And so Altogether, yeah, this feels pretty good. So if you want to play like mobile games on this, especially those with controller support, it's going to work pretty well. Now, in terms of first-person shooter controls, it's okay. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world. I can get by in a few matches like this, I think. But it's not the same as like holding an actual controller or even like the Odin 2, something with grips. And so, yeah, it's pretty amazing that you can play this game on something so small. I think the graphics look good. But in general, yeah, it's not going to be like a superior experience when it comes to playing like a first-person shooter game. Now, one thing I am noticing just after like 5 minutes of gameplay is it's getting warm like right here. I don't have like the fan turned on other than smart, and so it's not like super high, but I am getting a little bit of warmth right here. Okay, now I've been playing it a little bit with the sport mode on just to see if I can make it a little bit cooler, and it's still a little bit warm on the back, but now I've got like the fan noise to deal with. Let me let you hear it right here. And this is sport mode, which is supposed to be like the loudest. I don't think it's that bad. It's got a little bit of whine to it. Like I can hear that whine a little bit, but it's okay. Like it's making the device cooler. It's a little bit louder, but you know, if I had the volume up on the game, I could probably mask that a little bit better. You know, if you're going to be playing a mobile game, playing it outdoors, so you need like more brightness, you're going to be pumping up like a lot of the nits and whatnot. It's going to get hotter. Then yeah, you might need to use the fan. But I think in most environments, you may not need this. You can probably just use the smart mode. So let's turn that on instead. Yeah, the smart mode is like a lot lower. But of course, this is, you know, it could kick it up if it needs it. But at least the way it's tuned, this is not very loud. So let's do more testing with the fan and the overall like feel of the heat and stuff like that later on in the final review. But I did want to just note that this is something that I am experiencing and feeling right now. Okay, a few minutes later, I'm playing with, you know, the smart fan on. It's fine. It's getting a little bit warm, but nothing that I can't handle. So I think this is okay. I'm just playing against bots. That's why I'm doing so well. I'm not like actually good at this game, but it's not the same as playing on the Odin 2, which I think is like a really fun experience with Call of Duty Warzone. But this is still pretty darn good. And so if you're looking for something that's kind of similar to that in a smaller form factor, then yeah, I can definitely see this being an option. Okay, now we're going to do some game streaming. I've been playing this for about 5 minutes, a couple different games, and I can say that, you know, it was already warm when I was playing Call of Duty, but now that I'm playing something that's a lot less demanding on the CPU, it's still pretty warm. So I think that this is just going to be a factor with this device, given that it's so thin and small, is that warmth will be an issue with this chipset. I've got the fan on. It's on the smart mode still. It's not running very high, but I'm still feeling that ambient warmth. Either way, the triggers feel great. Like the analog input here is working out pretty well. I think that just overall, I wouldn't mind streaming on this device. It still feels pretty compromised. The fact that it's like kind of flat, doesn't have a grip, like those things would prevent me from like looking forward to streaming on this. But if it was the only device I had, I think I'd have a great time. I'd rather use something like the Logitech Cloud or even the Odin 2 for streaming compared to this. Okay, now let's get into some emulation testing. I already loaded up my Emulation Station Desktop Edition on here. I'm actually using my card from the Odin 2. So same like game, same like setup and everything. So I can just like jump into each of these. Everything's already scraped. It's not because I like did this ahead of time. It's because I had it on the Odin 2 and I've just moved it over. Either way, let's go ahead and start trying a couple games. We'll start with like Mario World, just see how it is playing a platformer. I'm kind of interested because the D-pad is on the bottom. I want to make sure it's nice and comfortable. The face buttons feel great. Like that's probably the best part of this experience. Reaching down for the D-pad is not so bad. I had to shift my hand down a little bit just to make sure that I had like a full range of motion, but it still feels pretty good. I could probably play this for quite some time with this kind of setup. It's not the best. Again, it's not like super ergonomic. I'm not noticing any sort of like input delay or any sort of like ghosting with the screen, but I'm not the best judge of that stuff. And again, this is just like first impressions. So I'll probably have to do more testing for that. But overall, yeah, this feels pretty snappy altogether. Now, one thing I am noticing, because the face buttons are so close to the analog stick right here, is that as I'm holding it, and I'm holding on to like the face button like this, and then I'm pushing the other one, like the run and then jump, I'm getting in, like this analog stick is getting in the way like this, as you can see. And so it's like a lot closer. Now, it was very similar with the Odin 2. It's just that it's a little bit more distance apart. And so you more have it like here at the bottom of your thumb. And so it's not that big of a deal. It never really bothered me there. But here it is definitely something where it is kind of bothering me. So That's another observation just right off the cuff, is that it's not an ideal situation when it comes to retro gaming for several different reasons. The first is that, yeah, the D-pad is down below, and so you are going to reach a little bit. You have to shift your hand, not super comfortable. And then also the face button has a little bit of play here with the analog stick. Now you can pull these off if you wanted and kind of play like that, and that's going to fix it, but just make sure you don't lose this thing. Either way, when it comes to retro gaming and platforming in particular, I think it's okay. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world. I would play like this, but it wouldn't be my first choice. Another thing I'm noticing is I don't like that the start and select buttons are here on the bottom left. The Odin 2, they're like right up here on top, like with the Nintendo Switch, and so it just feels really natural. This is not the same experience. Having to reach down here, for example, with my RetroArch hotkeys, I'm not using select as my hotkey enable. I'm using the left, like R3 button. So for example, to show my frame rate, I'm going to press like the L3 and then this at the same time. And that's how I'm like turning them off and on, as opposed to having to select and X instead. And so that's just one thing to kind of bear in mind. Now let's do the contra test. So I'm going to press down, then woggle it back and forth. And yeah, exactly like the Odin 2, I can definitely get the character to move if I move it far enough, but it's a very precise D-pad. So no problem here. I'm really loving this D-pad. I think it's great. And the fact that I can still move it pretty well means that it's going to pass the Street Fighter test as well. This altogether is a great D-pad. Now, one of the reasons why I'm kind of looking forward to taking this on travel is because this is powerful enough to be able to play a lot of Nintendo Switch emulation, which is one of my favorite things to do on the Odin 2. So I've already set up the Sudachi emulator, which is like a fork of Yuzu. And so I've got that set up right here, and I've already imported like my save games and stuff. And so I'm able to just jump right back to where I was on the Odin 2 right here on this one. Now, the screen is obviously smaller. It's only 5 inches. It's actually smaller than the Switch Lite screen. But it's such a small device, and so it's kind of neat to be able to play Nintendo Switch games like Mario Wonder on something that's just so small. Like, look at how small this thing is. And so, I don't know, I might really enjoy this situation where I'm using this to play Nintendo Switch games, nice and compact. It's really going to come down to like battery life, like how long is the battery life going to last on this? And then also like, am I going to get it crampy? Is it going to get too hot? I mean, after all, this Nintendo Switch emulator is pretty demanding. And so am I going to have to up the performance mode? I'm only playing on the lowest one this entire time, but do I really need to push the power on this thing? So that's what we're going to have to really kind of figure out in the review itself. But overall, just first impressions, it does kind of blow me away, the ability to be able to play Nintendo Switch games like this on something that's so small, and it's still 1080p. I'm playing it in docked mode. Like, it's all like really great kind of configuration right here in terms of Nintendo Switch emulation. This is one of the reasons why I prefer to play emulation as opposed to on a Switch itself, because I have a higher resolution. I can use cheats and mods, like all the things that I really like. And so this might end up being a really nice like Nintendo Switch Lite machine. Now, the main reason why I switched over to the Sudachi emulator from Yuzu is because they've been making like per game updates over the past few weeks, and one of those games is Animal Well, so I'm able to play this on this via Nintendo Switch emulation. And so that's pretty awesome. And so now I can actually start up this game. I've been playing it a little bit, not too much, but as you can see, yeah, I can play Animal Well on a tiny little device like this. And so I'm kind of looking forward to this idea and this prospect of playing this game on the plane when I like do my travel and whatnot. We'll see how it goes in terms of just like heat. That's the thing I'm worried about, and then battery life as well. I'm not taking my Odin 2 with me on the trip. I'm only taking this one. So I'm making a bit of a risk and gamble just in terms of making sure that I can play for the full flight. Now, thankfully, this has a 65-watt charge input. So if I bring my battery bank, I can actually just charge this up mid-flight, and hopefully it'll make it all the way. Now, this device is going to be capable of playing, things like PS2 and GameCube and whatnot. The setup for those is a little bit longer. So I'm just going to jump right into PSP, and we're going to test this one out and just see how this goes. Now, this is playing at a 4x resolution, so 1080p, and as expected, this is playing just fine. And the reason why I wanted to test this as well is because it looks pretty cool on this device, right? Looks like a PS Vita. We're playing like a PSP game on it, and we're playing it at a 4x resolution, something that the PS Vita could not do when it was playing PSP games. So this might be low-key like one of the cool things about this device, in that we can play like PSP games at a really cool resolution and in a nice form factor too. And so this might be pretty exciting for you if you're into PSP. Now, personally, I think I'm going to really enjoy GameCube and PS2 on this, and of course Nintendo Switch. But yeah, this is still like a really good match right here. Okay, I think I'm going to stop myself there when it comes to these impressions, just because I could keep testing, but I'm limited on time, and I want to make sure that I get a moment to actually like test this one as well. I've got 2 devices I have to knock out in the same day. I've never really done this before. Either way, let's start wrapping up, talk about some of my findings, at least initially, what I like and what I don't like. I like that this thing is so small. It feels very compact. It just kind of has a nice little PS Vita feel to it. And I think a lot of people are going to be excited about that prospect. In addition, I think the controls are very good. The D-pad's good, the face buttons are good, the analog sticks are great. Overall, I think that it's one of the bright spots of AYN's products is that they know how to make controls, and they did a pretty good job here. I also like that they tried something new with the mini LED display. Now, we still need to test it more to make sure it is a really good display, but at least right now I can say that, yeah, it gets bright, a little bit too bright for my tastes, but if that's something that is really important to you, then you might like that. Now let's talk about some of the things that are kind of red flags for me. The first is the fact that we don't have any LEDs on this. I didn't think I was going to miss it as much, but as soon as I turned it on, I was like, wait, where are the LEDs? Like, I hadn't even thought about it. I just figured they would be on there. And that's probably one of the things that I feel like is missing here, that I like the personalization that you can get when you have those RGB lights, and we don't have that option here. Another thing I think could be better are the ergonomics. Now, this is just a limitation of this form factor, but it doesn't have any bumps. And so, yeah, you could buy like a 3D printed one and make it more ergonomic, but then you're losing out on that small size. And so it's always going to be like a weird balance between the two. And I think it depends on the type of game you're playing. If you're going to be playing something with dual analog sticks, you can definitely feel the lack of grip there. But if you're just playing something that's like a platformer, it might be a better fit. Another thing on the negative side is that I can feel the warmth here, even when playing something lightweight, even with the fan on. And so that's going to be something that definitely feels like a compromise. And I think that kind of wraps up my whole summary with this, at least my initial impressions, is that this device is a compromise in many ways, but it's a requirement of having something so small. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. If it's going to be small, there's going to be some shortcomings with it as well. In this case, I think it's going to be just the overall warmth of it. We also have a smaller screen, and then the ergonomics too. And so those are some factors to consider if you are thinking about getting this device. In some ways, it is an upgrade over the original Odin 2, at least in the fact that if you're looking for something smaller. But for the most part, at least with my initial impressions, I would rather play on the Odin 2 than the Odin Mini. Yes, I like the small size of the Odin 2 Mini, but I like all the other things in the Odin 2 more, including those ergonomics, the fact that it never gets warm, and also just, I don't know, it's a little bit roomier, it's got a bigger screen. There are many reasons why I like that Odin 2, and this is just kind of reminding me why I like the Odin 2 so much. Now the next week or so is going to be a little bit rough because I am going to take that Odin 2 Mini with me on travel, and so we'll see how this goes. I think I'm going to come back here with some pretty mature understanding of how this device works and whether or not it's going to be a good fit for you. And I think I will have all that done well before this device even ships. So be on the lookout for that final review. And of course, be on the lookout for my RG Cube impressions video, which I'm about to eat dinner, and then I'm going to film this one next. And I'll probably wait 2 days after this other video, so that way I'm spacing it out a little bit while I'm on travel. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you picking one of these up, or do you think the Odin 2 is a better fit, or should you just get a Steam Deck Pro? Either way, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found it helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.